You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by Amac, the Association of Mature American Citizens.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber, and this is your Amac podcast, Better for America. Amac members have been asking which states will decide control of the Senate in 2024 and the presidency in 2024. Control of the Senate in 2022 and the presidency in 24. And can we trust our election system anyway? Joining us in just a few minutes is Cleta Mitchell. She is an American lawyer and conservative activist, and I'll be asking Cleta for her views on America's election system. For almost a year, Democrats and left-wing activists have smeared the efforts of Republican lawmakers to strengthen election integrity, calling it racist and voter suppression. But as high-flying rhetoric has abounded on both sides of the debate, it has left many of us, voters, wondering what actually happened. In particular, with the midterm elections looming as the next big test of the integrity of our American election system, where do the major swing states now stand on the biggest opportunity for election fraud, that is, mail-in absentee ballots? And so many AMAC members are curious, which states are those that stand for the biggest and greatest opportunity for election fraud? Now, recent polls show that a solid majority of Americans on both sides of the political aisle are eager for the answer to that question. According to the Center for Excellence in Polling, over 60% of all voters are concerned about institutional election fraud, including a surprising 31% of Democrats who admit that they are very concerned. Now, two states, Georgia and Texas, have received the most national attention for their new election integrity measures, with the Major League Baseball games pulling the 2021 All-Star Game down from Atlanta and multiple large corporations issuing public disapproval of the Republican-controlled state legislatures in both states over these bills, that is, Texas and Georgia. President Joe Biden went so far as to call Georgia's election integrity law Jim Crow on steroids. And remember when Democrats in the Texas state legislature fled Austin on private planes in an attempt to block a vote on the state's election integrity bill? The Texas bill, which finally passed, tightened the state's mail-in ballot rules by now requiring absentee voters to include either their driver's license number, their last four digits of their Social Security number, or a sworn statement that the voter has neither. Texas also now requires counties with 100,000 people or more to provide a live stream of all ballot drop boxes. That's a good measure. However, in America's upcoming midterm and presidential elections, the Lone Star State likely won't play a decisive role in which party controls the future direction of our country. With no Senate contest in 2022 and a comfortable win for Donald Trump in the most recent presidential election, other states will likely determine which side comes out on top. Now, who are those other states? These states, and we're calling them the Big Nine, are Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Iowa, and New Hampshire. The Big Nine will decide control of the Senate in 2022 and the presidency in 2024. But they have at least one more common trait. Each has seen serious fights in 2021 over election integrity and mail-in ballots. Of the Big Nine, Georgia's laws, Georgia's law, SB 202, you can go ahead and look that up, received the lion's share of national attention. Of course, it also received an outsized share of leftist hysteria. Under the law, election officials can't send unsolicited absentee ballot applications without a voter requesting one. That makes a lot of sense. Georgia has joined Arizona and Florida in this regard. Voters must also make their request for an absentee ballot earlier than 2 Fridays before election, rather than just the day or the Friday before election. The bill's defenders argue this will likely lead to an increase in the number of absentee ballots actually counted because it will decrease the number of rejected ballots. In turn, Georgia voters will need to provide their driver's license number or equivalent voter ID number. Among the Big Nine, Georgia now joins Ohio and Wisconsin in requiring a driver's license number on ballots. Iowa, North Carolina, New Hampshire, Florida, Arizona, and Pennsylvania do not. One modest reform not included in Georgia's election integrity bill was a witness requirement for absentee ballots. Instead, like Florida, Arizona, Iowa, New Hampshire, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, Georgia allows unwitnessed mail-in ballots. North Carolina and Wisconsin do require absentee ballots to be witnessed. Missouri's absentee voters are actually required to have their ballots notarized, but none of the Big Nine have taken that approach. What about timing? What's the deadline for returning these mail-in ballots? Most of the Big Nine require absentee ballots to be received by the time polls close on election night, including Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, New Hampshire, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. But Ohio and North Carolina don't. In fact, Ohio even counts absentee ballots received up to 10 days after Election Day, as long as the ballot was postmarked before Election Day. That's not Ohio's only fast and loose rule either. Most states in America have either no cure period. A cure period is a time in which voters can correct a mistake in their signature or try to overcome a verification problem in their absentee ballot, or a cure period of 3 days or less after Election Day. But Ohio is an outlier. It allows 7 days for curing. This puts Ohio in a very small group of states, including Oregon and Rhode Island, constituencies with very different political leanings. One thing is clear. As long as a strong majority of Americans have serious doubts about the integrity of mail-in voting, it will be difficult, if not impossible, for Americans to have faith in election outcomes. How states address these concerns is of vital importance to the health of our democracy, and it is accordingly the responsibility of both elected officials and a free and independent press to explain changes to election laws clearly and honestly. People are tuned in and people are engaged, and they expect no less from these charged with safeguarding our democratic ideals. Coming up with us in just a few moments, folks, is Cleta Mitchell. She is an American lawyer and has great insight on election integrity in our nation. Don't go anywhere. Coming right up, Cleta Mitchell. Today, we have with us a real leader, someone who is always thinking, who has held elective office, and who was, like Ronald Reagan, once a Democrat and became a Republican, and represents a moral, legal, and political compass for the nation. Her name is Cleta Mitchell. Having once been a representative in Oklahoma, she has 40 years of experience with law, politics, and teaching. She has spent time at the Harvard Kennedy School and in countless educational settings, practices law before the Federal Election Commission, often represents candidates, campaigns, and parties, and has been a vigilant protector of our election process, election integrity, and fidelity to our nation's values. And she is a friend of Amac's 2.4 million members, so we are so grateful for your time today. Welcome, Cleta Mitchell.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's really an honor to get to be with you and Amac, because I have a special place in my heart for Amac.
Well, that's just wonderful. And I want to thank you because our members have a lot of questions, really, and you are a distinguished counsel. Cleta, historians sometimes say that when someone intersects with history at just the right time, That's a good thing. And with everything that's going on, the election process and integrity questions that have been raised in recent years, I think that you are one of the experts that America really needs at this time. You have experience with elections, with election laws, ethics, integrity issues, and how laws are meant to be followed. And we know that sometimes they're not followed. And so I feel that we have a really good opportunity to get your insights. Let me ask you, we've come through some very close elections, not just presidential, but at every level, and public trust seems battered. Now we see small margins of victory, and there's a lot of talk of illegal aliens voting and many other irregularities. How can we assure that we have integrity in our elections?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there.
Mm,
I will say, I'll say this. I was one of the, you're right. I've been doing this for many, many years. And I was part of President Trump's legal team as a volunteer in Georgia following the 2020 presidential election. And what I saw there and what we did there made me realize that we as Americans have allowed the election system to be taken over and infiltrated. The election offices have been infiltrated over the past decade by far left organizations, funneled through the election offices and fueled by left-wing billionaires such as Pierre Omidyar, who is an eBay billionaire who has invested hundreds of his millions of dollars of his own money into building different kinds of entities that do business. Now they're part of the election process, tracking your absentee ballot scout, a left-wing organization. I could go and give you lots of examples of that. But what I also realize is that we've allowed that to happen. We think, well, gee, that's a government function. And so we just assume that it's going to be fair and treat everybody the same. And that isn't what happened in 2020. And it was the culmination of a lot of effort by the left over many, many years. So what we have to do, if we want to ensure election integrity, is that we have to become involved and engaged in our local election offices. And so one of the things that what I'm doing now is that I am the senior legal fellow at the Conservative Partnership Institute, and we have created the Election Integrity Network, which is my backdrop. That's what you see. And what we are doing is I'm doing a podcast weekly on election integrity. So if you visit our website, whoscounting.us, that's whoscounting.us, you can subscribe to the newsletter of the Election Integrity Network, get our weekly podcast, and sign up to become part of an election integrity task force in your home state and your home county. That's what we're trying to build, is getting citizen engagement, eyes on every ballot, watching what the election offices are doing, and not waiting until election season, but starting now. And so that's what we're trying to do, is get people to be engaged and citizens to say, we're going to take back this election system.
that is just fantastic. I think that's great advice. So many AMAC members are getting involved in their local
Yes.
community. They're stepping up. They're becoming poll watchers. We commend them. We thank them because we've got to preserve the public faith in our electoral system. It is
Yes, we
so
do.
important. You know, without that, then we just don't know if our vote is truly counting. That it was so helpful. Thank you very much. I do want to take a moment and expand a little bit. We have been so concerned about the Democrat bills like S1 and S4. These are efforts in the U.S. Senate, and that they're parallel bills in the U.S. House, HR1, HR4, which seem to want to really game the system, really setting things up for one-party dominance. And I think, you know, the polling that I've looked at suggests that Americans recognize this. Americans want voter identification. And these bills are actually making that they would remove that requirement, correct, becoming illegal. People understand that the use of mail-in ballots is where a lot of fraud is occurring. So if you could please help us understand, how do you see those issues, those bills in particular, and the risk that they may pose?
Well, they're quite dangerous, and they are, remember, all these bills have flown through the Democrat House of Representatives, and the only thing that has kept them from becoming law and they are quite dangerous. And I'll go into a couple of the things that you mentioned, and there's even more. But the only thing that has protected the country from this power grab to basically codify all the mischief from 2020 and to make that the law of the land, to have federal takeover of our election processes, which our U.S. Constitution confers on the states the responsibility for determining the time, place, and manner in which elections are to be held. And these bills would all grab that power and take it to the U.S. Congress and the federal government and turn our election systems over to the Democrat-controlled Department of Justice. And let me just say this, even during a Republican presidency, you must not think that the people who work in the voting section and the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department somehow are becoming fair-minded toward conservatives. No, they are far left activists. Every lawyer in the voting section is a far left, politically active lawyer. And this is what the Democrats want to turn our election system into, is one that's controlled by the far left Democrat left-wing lawyers in the Justice Department. So we've been very engaged, and I'm proud to say that the only reason we've stopped this bill so far is because Joe Manchin in West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona have refused to budge on the idea of busting up the filibuster. So it requires 60 votes. As long as they're willing to stand their ground and support and protect the filibuster, the Senate filibuster. So if we lost the two of them on the issue of the filibuster, we would lose our election system to these left-wing crazies in the Department of Justice. So we've been really focused on that this year, and you're right. AMAC members have been really stepping up, sending those calls and letters, phone and email outreach to all these senators, and it's paid off so far. We just have to keep our fingers crossed that Manchin and Sinema will stand firm on not giving up on the filibuster.
Yeah, I mean, and folks need to know, and that is why it's so good that you're doing what you're doing with your podcast and getting the word out and joining us here today, because what we need to understand and educate the public about is that this one-party federal election commission would essentially invite, in my opinion, that the provisions invite fraud, undermine oversight, reduce public trust in our electoral process. And so we need to pay attention to these bills, S1 and S4, and see if they're going to try to sneak parts or components of this huge federal takeover of our elections, essentially stripping the states of their rights. We're keeping a very close eye on that. So this is really interesting because your professional journey has really been remarkable in the many roles that you've had, being in the political arena and then helping to keep the arena of fair and honest elections and really being a voice for constitutional, ethical, and traditional conservative thinking. I want to shift a little bit and ask, how did you start as a Democrat in '76 and then become a Republican by 1996 and now a leading voice for conservative thinking? I'm sure our members would be interested. And I think that this is a thought that perhaps has occurred to other people over the years. Your thoughts?
Well, I grew up in Oklahoma, in Oklahoma City. I went to the University of Oklahoma and law school at the University of Oklahoma. And I actually served in the legislature for 8 years, as you noted, as a Democrat from representing Norman, Oklahoma, which is where the university is. And so after I left the legislature, then I left the legislature and after 8 years, and then I began work in the private sector. And I began to realize in the 1980s, watching the federal government come in and close all of the banks in Oklahoma and really take over the banking system. And I began to realize, when watching all of that a government big enough to take care of all of us is big enough to destroy any one of us anytime it chooses. And I think we're seeing that played out now with the FBI that we've always felt was honorable and and proper and law enforcing. And now what we see is the FBI and the criminal justice system insinuating itself into the political process in ways that we could not ever imagine. And we saw that in 2016 when they, were engaged in entrapping Michael Flynn, going after President Trump. But my thought process really is that I finally realized that the things, my values and principles that I had been taught by my mother as a child and in my church, that those principles and beliefs were at odds with these political beliefs about, the government giving things to people instead of working hard. And I began to realize that those two sets of beliefs were in conflict with one another. They couldn't both be right. And so I began to read some books. I read one important book that I read was called The Dream and the Nightmare, the 60s Legacy to the Underclass. And it's by a gentleman named Myron Magnet, who was an editor at the City Journal, which is part of the Manhattan Institute. And I highly recommend that book because what it says is the American people are very generous. And so all these social programs in the 60s that were enacted to try to help people, that what over time they became ways that really hurt people. And if you think about every single program of the 60s, whether it's the Great Society, public housing, welfare, dependency, all of these things are at conflict with principles of how you raise children to be self-sufficient and responsible adults. And so another book that I read was one by Michael Barone, who I've known for many years. And he was also a liberal Democrat. And he and I laughed many times about both of us on this journey. And I always tell him, well, one of the things that made me realize I was really not a Democrat anymore, at least not in the Democratic Party of today. And it's gotten so much worse since I left the Democratic Party. I mean, it's unrecognizable. But his book talked about how the programs that were passed by Congress post World War II that helped create a permanent middle class, which was the GI Bill, so helping people to get an education, the VA housing, helping veterans be able to buy a home, that those things were, that there's a real difference between what happened post World War II and what happened in the 1960s that created not a middle class, but a permanent underclass. And if you think of the trillions of dollars that the United States taxpayers have spent on anti-poverty programs, and what do we have to show for that? Well, the truth of the matter is the economy and giving people the opportunity to work and the dignity of work. And what happened under President Trump when the economy gave everybody the chance to work. Everybody had an opportunity to have a job. And you could move up in jobs that because they were desperate to have, the economy was growing and people were given the opportunity to be engaged in the workplace, to have the dignity and the self-reliance. That is not what the Democrats of today want. And so I'm a very, very big believer in work and the importance of work. And that's one of the principles that we need to adhere to. And so that it became an easy thing for me to say, look, maybe I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me. And it to me is just unrecognizable when I think about the Democrats in maybe the 40s and the 50s, but today, it gets worse and worse and worse. And to call Joe Biden a moderate, I mean, who are they kidding? I mean, they are literally trying to wreck this country, and they want everybody to be dependent on the government so that they can have permanent power. And they don't want people to work.
That's so true. Yeah, that is the truth. I mean, when you take away someone's purpose and when you minimize someone's success and you find ways to create dependency, I mean, just try doing that with your own children, for goodness sakes, and look at the
Absolutely.
kinds of children we raise. And
Yes.
there's something to be said for feeling that you're living out a daily purpose in life. And oftentimes we find that in our jobs and parts of our work, in helping other people and becoming resourceful. And that is what made America so great. I think is that spirit. Well, I do pray that spirit is alive and well, and that the reason why people are coming to America is to find the dream, to live the American dream. And so all of these things are just so important. And I think it allows people to really have a moment, sit back and reflect. When you're talking to friends and family, these are good questions to ask. I mean, who do you believe in? Right? People or government? I was chatting with a friend just a few days ago, and she said that to me. She said, that's what the choice is these days. It's, do you believe in people, yourself, and that you can make better choices for you? Or do you believe that it's better to hand over decision making to a government who really is just going to not necessarily look out for your individual best interests? So this is really great, and it's just common sense. So I want to thank you for that. I want to shift back to the future elections, because so many AMAC members are concerned. They don't even really know what to think as it relates to how secure our elections are, and they're concerned. AMAC members are afraid that their votes will count. They want to be sure that their votes are counting and that illegal votes are not counted. So what can you tell us about what the chances are that we can restore full confidence in our voting process coast to coast in every state, especially as we're approaching the 2022 elections?
Well, one of the things that we're doing at the Election Integrity Network is that I've just written a guidebook, a handbook for citizens that we're in the process right now of getting it edited and put into some nice looking framework and style and all. And then we're going to prepare training tapes. And what these are, this is, every individual can take this, form a group in your local county. What we hope to have is a permanent infrastructure of citizen watchdogs on the state. And we're telling people how you can do this, having a state election integrity task force for the whole state, and then one for the key counties, and give people the tools that they can use in their own communities to really know what's going on at their local election boards and to track what's going on, what kind of voting systems. And we give all the questions that people need to ask and the different components of what it will take to have a robust election integrity task force in the county or the municipality, states, or the parish, depending if you're in Louisiana. But we need people, we need citizens engaged and watching what's going on at the election offices well before election day, well before election season. And then one other thing, but let me just finish that. But so we're going to be providing that. And so anyone who's interested in that can certainly sign up to participate by going to the website, www.whoscounting.us, and sign up to be part of this training and learning how you and some of your, half a dozen friends can be really become the experts on voting in your county. That's what it's going to take, because we've been absent and the left has been present, and we need to change that. And then, one of the things I would say, wherever you live, when early voting begins, go vote in person that day. Because we heard so many times in 2020, people would arrive at the polls only to be told, oh, well, Mrs. Jones, our records show that you've already voted. And someone may have voted there in the name of another. Now, that's true voter suppression. And so in Virginia this year, in this off election, we've really been encouraging people to get out and go vote early. Now, unfortunately, these people in Virginia, the Democrat legislature passed a bill that they've been voting since September 17th, if you can imagine that. So we've got to do something to change these laws, shrink these days of early voting. But we've really been encouraging people to go vote in person as soon as they possibly can, so no one can steal their votes. So getting involved, we're going to have the tools made available. I'm sure AMAC will be able to send this out to all of its members. and we're going to work together. We're going to get people engaged and involved at the local level to be able to watch what's going on in their state and their counties. That's what it's going to take for us to be able to reclaim this election process.
Excellent. Oh, good. And I'm glad, that's great information. We'll go ahead and put that URL up on the website right here. And we encourage people certainly get involved, because that is the way that we can ensure that things are being done properly. Quick question, given the state of play in Virginia's gubernatorial election right now, do you think Americans should be confident that their votes will be counted and illegal votes not counted?
Well, you know what, the thing that's very interesting, and it's a good opportunity to see what happens when there are citizens involved. In the key counties in Virginia, starting earlier this year, there are citizens who formed on their own, formed election integrity task forces. And they have been very involved, very engaged all year. They've been at the election board meetings. They've been looking at the election systems, the voting systems. What's the technology that's used? What are the vulnerabilities for the election systems? What are the procedures that are supposed to be followed? Are they following those? I'll give you one example. In Virginia, if you register to vote somewhere other than an election office, or what they call in Virginia the registrar's office, if you register to vote at the county fair or whatever, and that registration is turned in, the election office sends a letter, a follow-up letter confirming your name and address. If that follow-up letter is returned undeliverable, that is supposed to be noted on the voter rolls, so that if you show up later to vote, you have to produce identification that shows that you are that person and you live at that address, or you are not allowed to vote. You have to be. And so in May, these volunteers were looking at these, they were in the election offices and noticed this mail coming back undeliverable. And so it was just going into a bin. And so the election integrity volunteers asked the registrar, what are you doing with those? And he said, and he's new this year. He said, well, I don't really know. We're not doing anything with them now. And so they went and got the information from the experts as to what was supposed to be done, and came back and showed that to him. And he said, oh, okay. So then they started noting that in the voter rolls. But if they hadn't been there, they wouldn't have seen it. They wouldn't have known about it. They wouldn't have known to fix it. And so they were, and fortunately, it was fixed without a lawsuit or whatever. Fast forward 3 weeks ago, the law in Virginia is that you have to have the last 4 digits of the Social Security number on any application for an absentee ballot. Well, we know there are these left-wing groups that have been sending out millions of pieces of mail to get that are applications for absentee ballots. And so people were just sending those in without adding the last 4 digits of their Social Security number. But those requests are not supposed to be fulfilled. And there was no announcement, but the registrar just started telling the employees, just ignore that, go ahead and send the ballot anyway. And one of the workers basically whispered to the volunteers on the election integrity task force what had happened. And so they went in and documented that, sure enough, there were all these ballots that had been sent out to people who did not have the last 4 digits of the Social Security number on their applications. And so they filed a lawsuit. Now, unfortunately, the judge on Friday said that only a candidate would have standing to bring the action. But because the lawsuit was filed, at least it kept any others from any other counties from following suit. And now that's something that we're going to have to deal with between now and next year and next year's election. But look, I mean, there is so much to watch and to do. These mail ballots are a disaster, but that's just one example of how this small group of citizens, maybe 20 people in this large county who actually work on this all the time, and they've made a difference. And they've also recruited poll watchers, and a lot of AMAC members have been part of that. And they have covered so many polling places they've targeted, the worst precincts that they need to watch the most, and they've literally covered 70, 80, 90% of their shifts in poll watching, so much so that the Washington Post actually wrote an article last Thursday about all these Republican poll watchers. So it's pretty great that, but it's our people, our citizens, our patriots out in force saying we're going to reclaim these elections. And to me, it's very gratifying. Now we just have to hope that the left-wing groups don't come up with something this week that would flood the zone with a lot of illegal ballots. But we've been watching every move they make. So maybe this time we'll be able to prevent it.
That's right. Oh, good. This is wonderful, really. And it's so important that we have people like you in this nation that care, that are, committing so much time to really help preserve the integrity in our elections, because we've got the 2022 midterms, 2024 presidential election, and it is just, as we can't emphasize enough, and our members get it. Once we lose control over our elections, we're not much of a country, and this is just so key. So thank you. Final question. I know you're busy, and I really appreciate how generous you've been with your time. For anybody listening that wants to become a poll watcher or worker, or do something, in response to your call to action, explain roughly how much time is involved, and is there a lot involved in getting involved, or is it fairly easy to get involved?
Well, it's easy to get involved. Just let's start with that. It's easy to get involved, and the time can be a lot of time. It just depends on how much time you take. One of the things I would tell you is that the first thing I would urge people to do is become involved in a task force in your local area, starting now, starting this year, and then, because there's so much to do, looking at the voter rolls, learning the procedures, learning all the things that go on. And then for those who do have the time and ability, to try to become an election official, to try to be inside counting ballots, not just on the outside watching the ballots being counted by others. So there really are some multiple steps. And one of the things that has happened repeatedly over the years in a number of states is that in most states, there's a requirement to have an equal number of Democrats and Republicans on these various boards and counting task forces and that kind of thing. And because a lot of these election offices they say, well, we can't find enough Republicans who volunteer, so we'll just fill those Republican slots with Democrats. And that, honestly, that happens in a lot of states, and we have to stop that. We need to have, again, eyes on every ballot. And so get involved in a task force. We'll tell you how to do that from www.whoscounting.us. And then you'll learn the process, becoming an election official if you possibly can. And if the only thing you can do is a few hours at the polls observing once election start. And I think the shifts in Virginia are 2 hours, but what we're finding is people will do 2 hours and then they'll say, I'd like to do this some more, so I'll fill another shift and another shift. So it can be as much or as little as you can give, but believe me, I say I didn't serve in the military, but to me, this is my duty as an American to try to save our country. So that's why I urge people to think of it that way. This is our patriotic duty, and hopefully people will be able to give of their time and their talent over the next years to say, we're here, we're watching, and we're not going away.
Oh, thank you so much, Cleta. This has been really wonderful. You've covered so much in this interview and this time together, so I can't tell you how important your thoughts are for our members and more broadly for America. Thank you so much for your leadership, for your energy, for your personal conviction, and keeping us really informed and motivated. And I think that for those listening, it is one of the greatest things you can do is volunteer, do what's right, help to ensure that our elections are done properly and that we can have faith and regain faith in our elections. So I think that you've really motivated us to keep fighting and to fight harder. So thank you again.
Thank you for
appreciate you
having
being
me.
with me.
Really
Excellent.
appreciate
And
it. Thank you.
yeah, it's great. You've been such a great friend. So we look forward to working together to see that these things
Great.
do all come to fruition. And I want to
Thank
thank
you.
all of our listeners out there today for tuning in today. If you haven't downloaded the AMAC News app, you can watch and listen to today's podcast plus track breaking news right there on your iPhone or your smartphone. Please be sure to hit that subscribe button, like, follow, and share wherever you are on social media. Until next time, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here. God bless you, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Better for America podcast. To learn more about AMAC and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.